1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com. Bob Lankard, it's probably been 5 or 6 years, it seems, since Evergreen Conservancy has been with us. Certainly it was before the pandemic.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, a long time, but we're happy to have you back with us. Our conversation brought to you by Marcus & Mack, voted Best Personal Injury Law Firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. We're about to be joined on the telephone by Tom Keller, who is going to speak to us about a program that he is going to be doing. And Bob, it's coming up soon, isn't it?
Yes, Friday, November the 3rd, Blue Spruce Lodge at 7 p.m.
Mm-hmm. And it's on the American Martine, also known as the Pine Marten.
Yes.
And he's going to tell us all about it.
All right.
So let's welcome him to the program here this morning. Tom, good morning.
Good morning, Todd. Good morning, Bob. Thanks so much for having me.
It's good to have you here in the studio with us. The Pine Marten used to be something that was relatively common to see in Pennsylvania woods, but not for a very, very long time, right?
That's correct. Yeah, it was once a very common native, and it would have been throughout all of the forests in Pennsylvania, which would have covered up most of the state. But it's been gone for about 120 years.
Wow, that is a long time. But thankfully, it's not been gone from the American wilds, and now there's the opportunity for Pennsylvania to reintroduce it. Tom, I'm sure there are a lot of things that go into that decision, and a lot of it has to do with habitat, correct?
That is correct, yeah. So the first thing that we needed to do was to develop a feasibility assessment, and habitat was a major part of that. So we looked at trying to determine, did we have suitable habitat still remaining within Pennsylvania? If we did, where was it located? How much did we have? What was the quality of that habitat? And could it support marten once again within the state?
And you make that decision then. And the decision isn't final yet, is it?
It's not. No, it's not, Todd. So basically where we are at is we've developed a feasibility assessment that looks at potential impacts. It looks like habitat, as we mentioned. And then it looks at a variety of other things, as including, has this been done before? What have we seen with past reintroductions? Why would we consider doing this? What are the primary reasons? And then the next step was to develop a 10-year management and reintroduction plan. And that reintroduction plan starts to lay out things like, okay, who are our partners, both in Pennsylvania and outside of the state? What does translocation actually look like? Research and monitoring. And then how do we manage that population into the long term? And now that plan is actually out for public review and comment. And so the public can go check that plan out and provide comment on the plan to our agency, and that's really important to help strengthen the plan and help us understand, do people support the plan or not. And then once we have that, we'll synthesize those results and present that back to the Board of Commissioners as early as January, and then we'll be asking the board at that time in January to accept the plan, and then they'll decide whether to move forward or not.
Now, I'm assuming that the reason the marten disappeared from Pennsylvania's woods is because of trapping. I might be wrong about that. You can tell me. But if that is the case, are there measures in place to prevent even accidental trapping of martens?
Yeah, what a great question. And so when we do any kind of a reintroduction, looking at why it disappeared in the first place is the most important thing. And as you mentioned, have those things been rectified? And in the case of the marten, the actual primary reason was habitat loss. And so we know by the early 1900s, almost all of the old growth or original forests that we had in Pennsylvania had been cut off and cut down. And of course, that was needed for a lot of industrial reasons and residential homes and things like that. But unfortunately, a lot of species suffered from that, and the marten was one. But there was also unregulated harvest at that same time, so we did not have any rules in place. There was no laws regulating hunting or trapping or anything like that into the late 1800s. And so it was very important to consider not only habitat, as we mentioned, with a habitat suitability model, but also do we have regulations in place? And of course we do. We have very structured regulations in place for both hunting and trapping in Pennsylvania, and there is no open season for the marten at this time. Of course, we don't have any, but we wouldn't open that up for marten, even in the case if they would be reintroduced, until we felt like there was a population that could sustain harvest.
Tom Keller is our guest on the line. Bob Lankard in the studio with us from the Evergreen Conservancy. Tom is a fur-bearing biologist with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Tom, describe the marten for us. What is this animal like?
Yeah, and that's really important because it's been gone for so long, and it's been generations of Pennsylvanians that have come and gone. It's kind of disappeared from our memory. And so the marten's actually the same size as the American mink. It ranges 20 to 24 inches long from tip of the tail to its nose. It has a fairly long tail that can be fairly bushy depending on the time of the year with their coat. They do have a very thick, furry coat that's important for getting them through the wintertime. And then, of course, during the summer, they lose some of the hair in that coat, and it thins down. They weigh between 2 to 3 pounds, and they're part of the weasel family. And so we think of our members of the weasel family. We have true weasels in Pennsylvania. We also have the mink and the fisher and the river otter. And so it kind of fits in between the fisher, and then again is the same size as the mink. Has a light brown coat with an orange bib underneath its chin, and it is a very striking, beautiful animal.
Tom is going to be at Blue Spruce Lodge on Friday, November the 3rd, 7 p.m. It's a free program, open to the public. Anybody can come. Tom, what are we going to hear and see at that meeting?
So we're going to start with some of that history that we mentioned. Why did we lose marten in the first place? So we're going to step back in time, look at the history of Pennsylvania, both pre-settlement and then through the settlement period, and then into today. And we're going to talk about not just the marten, but other species that were lost and reintroduced to the state. And then we'll get more into the marten specifically. What did that feasibility assessment look at? And what does some of that history or ecology look like? We'll dig into habitat, these potential impacts that we looked at, past reintroductions, and then really why would we consider doing this? What are our primary reasons or justification? And then we'll talk a little bit about the plan, this 10-year plan that we have set up for marten. Where would we put marten in Pennsylvania? Where would we get marten from? And how do we go about doing that?
I love the phrase rewilding, the rewilding of Pennsylvania, which in today's day and age people might not think is possible with expansion of urban areas and suburban areas. Rewilding the state would seem to be a pretty difficult proposition, but that'll be a part of your discussion as well, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And there's still a lot of wild areas within the state that folks, if you're not familiar with that northern tier, folks tend to forget about. And so we're going to talk about, how those areas have remained wild and the importance of public lands, and then that habitat that's there and how they're being managed long term to remain wild and places where we have lots of wild animals and good wildlife habitat.
Bob Lankard with us from the Evergreen Conservancy. Bob, but this really sounds like a fascinating program.
I'm looking forward to it. I've heard good things about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fun to see, and I'm assuming, Tom, that you're actually going to have maybe a mounted marten there.
I will. Yep, I'll have a full mounted marten there, and then I'll have some pelts, and we can kind of compare those sizes of the marten to other species, just so folks have a good idea of what that scale looks like. Again, we've forgotten about this animal, and so it's important to refamiliarize Pennsylvanians with the marten and what it looks like.
7 p.m., Friday, November 3rd at Blue Spruce Lodge. Tom Keller will be making the presentation. Tom, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you, Bob, for having me on. I appreciate it as well.
It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS. So Tom is going to put on a pretty neat program, Bob. I really like the whole idea of it, and we've been very interested since they announced that the marten is a possibility to return to Pennsylvania. And probably the marten was very common around these parts, too, wasn't it? So we talk again with Bob Lankard from the Evergreen Conservancy. Bob, there's another thing that we want to mention today, and that's the Bags to Benches program.
Yes, that's something that we've started ever since we are in Indiana in the morning. And the bags that we're talking about are those grocery bags that are so much in the news and newspaper sleeves. Mm-hmm. And what happens is that we collect these, and whenever we have 500 pounds collected, then we take it to Giant Eagle or Martin's, where they bale it and send it off to a company known as Tex. And they use this plastic to make benches. Mm-hmm. And we're now in our 12th cycle, along with the League of Women Voters, that have been made into benches. And these benches are given to various service agencies. Mm-hmm. And the next bench that we're going to get is going to be placed somewhere along the Baker Trail. And it's going to be in memory of Paul Hicks, one of our members. And Paul and his wife Doris volunteered at the Baker Trail, and there would be races that they would have on the Baker Trail, and they would man a site where they would provide aid to these runners. And they were very active in volunteering for cleanup efforts, and we're going to dedicate the bench to Paul at some time in the future.
Very nice. Really quickly, how can people participate?
They can take soft plastics, not the bottles. Those are for the recycling center, but they can take them to the YMCA, the Burr Building, and the S&T Arena.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. And we'll look forward to that. Bob Lankard, thank you so much for coming to visit with us.
Thank you.
It is the voice of Indiana County. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com.
Hi, I'm attorney Bob Marcus.
And I'm attorney Brian Mitterheiser.
If you've been hurt in an accident, you need an experienced team of attorneys, and that's Marcus and Mack.
For nearly 50 years, we've helped clients obtain financial compensation for their losses, and our firm is dedicated to doing what is right and whatever it takes.
If you've been hurt in an accident, tell them you mean business and call Marcus and Mack.
Voted Best Personal Injury Lawyer 2 straight years in the Best of Indiana County contest. Visit them online at marcusandmack.com.
Trends change in the funeral industry just like any other profession, some for the good and some for the bad. Hello, this is John Lefdahl, owner and director of the John A. Lefdahl Funeral Home. Social media and smartphones at times have taken over personal communication. As a funeral director of 28 years, I personally feel that all funeral arrangements should be handled in person and not online, except for certain conditions such as out-of-state families. The downfalls of making arrangements online would include there is no time to ask questions that are bound to arise. Also, there is no time and no forum to begin the grief process. At the John A. Lefdahl Funeral Home, we prefer to meet face-to-face with our families to build a lasting and trusting relationship, also giving time to patiently review all the important information